Good morning, everybody at Nonviolence International New York. I welcome our interns and then our long-term volunteer, Jessica, as well as myself, the Educational Program Manager, and Amelia, the Creative Director. We are honored to be discussing Orange Shirt Day and providing honor to the young Indigenous children that were never returned home. We watched the video we watched a video called Voices of Amiskwaciy, Harold Cook's story, and we're going to be reflecting on that. But first, I would like everyone to take a moment of silence.
1 minute of silence to think about the children and hope for them to return home.
So let's start. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for taking a moment of silence out of respect for those families and the children that were never returned. Before we get into our discussion, Jessica, would you like to make any opening remarks about this topic and talk about why you, where your passion stemmed from and why you suggested that our team focused on this topic? Or is there anything you would like to talk about before we get started?
Yeah, I just hope that all the children are found, everyone's, like, all the remains are discovered, all the grounds are searched. I hope that there's reconciliation for all of these people and the families that endured all of this cultural loss and abuse by the schools and the churches.
Mm.
I just hope that, somehow we can all work together to bring them home to where they need to be.
Yeah. Thank you. For the last few weeks, we've been having weekly discussions about this topic and learning about the different places that were being searched in the different schools. We learned about different stories. And I would love to hear from the group, while watching this story, how did it make you feel? Do you guys have any reflection you would like to talk about for this story, for this video? Go ahead, Slava.
Honestly, I couldn't watch full video because I started crying and I had to stop it. It's too hard for me, honestly.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. How about you, Shavane?
Yeah, me too. There were definitely points where it was really hard to watch and to watch the whole thing, but it was important. And yeah, it just kind of because we have spoken about these issues in these residential schools for the last few weeks, but to hear that personal account was really harrowing and really like tough to listen to, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Amelia?
I thought it was really amazing that he was willing to share his story and he was willing to be so honest and vulnerable with it. And he was really able to really create a visual understanding of what he went through with his words, and it was really impactful.
The moment that really stood out to me was the way that he just absolutely lit up at the end when talking about his grandchildren. I thought that was so beautiful. And it was while learning about and researching and studying this topic with my team, it's been very intense and very saddening. But then this video I thought did a really great job of bringing, like, really showing the human side of the topic and just how much he loved his grandchildren and how much he cared for them and how much, he just wants so badly for his grandchildren not to go through what he went through. That just really stood out to me, and I'll remember that for the rest of my life, just remembering his face and how he was smiling and laughing about his grandchildren. I think that just really, really stood out to me. Did you guys notice that moment at the end?
Mm,
Was there a moment or a quote that really stood out to you guys?
For me, um, it was actually so, which really kind of helped with the moment that you're saying, was when he talked about how when no one believed him, all the rest of the achievements and things in his life just were numb because, it was just this weight of what happened to him would kind of numb out anything else in his life, and how no one would believe him and his guilt and stuff like that. And that was, I've never heard that before. I've never kind of heard about people talk about trauma that way. And it really resonated with me. And then the change, like what you were saying, when he started talking about his grandchildren and how they were able to unnumb him, and that was just very beautiful. And that really stood out to me.
Yeah. The amount of gaslighting the children at these residential camps must have gone through, because they knew that this wasn't normal. They knew that anything that was happening there wasn't right, and yet they were told that this was the word of God, or this was what was supposed to be happening. And just for them to go through that much trauma to actually stay there, and actually, I mean, not that they had a choice, but that just seems, I can't imagine going through something so traumatic and believing, or being forced to believe, that it was something that I was supposed to be in or something that I deserved. And I think that moment of him going from authority figure to authority figure, trying to get support and nobody being there for him, that's just so scary, and so, yeah, just numbing, like you said.
Well, something that was interesting was they actually said, they told him he was lying. They said, people of faith don't do that. So it was like, why are you lying to us? Like, that's ridiculous. He wouldn't do that. And he said that's where the guilt came from. Because I mean, when you have all these people all the way up, he went all the way up to the board, and everyone's like, no, people of faith don't do that.
Jessica, was there a moment that stood out for you?
I think that moment where he spoke about the faith part, where people that believe in God don't do that. People of faith don't do that. It was like brainwashing, and to be told that on like a daily basis, consistently for years. As your brain is forming, as you're aging and learning, as a young kid, the impact, the traumatic impact on him is very understandable. It makes sense, but it's also awful. Like the whole thing makes me very sad and angry. I'm glad he was able to go to the Supreme Court, but I don't think that he really got the justice that he wanted. And I think this is going to be the case for a lot of survivors and a lot of families that had children or had relatives that were buried.
Mhm. Well, I actually had a question for you, Jessica. In the video, did it say that the guy only got 2 years in jail?
Yeah.
That I can't. That is so. That is so. I heard it and I couldn't believe it that he only got 2 years and for just all the horrible things that he did. And I just think that's just I don't even have words for it. Wow.
I would say it's unfaithful.
Yeah.
It's atrocious. It's a great injustice. I mean, these kids were taken to these schools and just had everything stripped away from them, and they were made to think of like self-hate for themselves and their culture just to survive. And so when you're brainwashed in that way, that's all you really know is, just like basically masking to survive. And that's what they did. But after a long time, when you finally come out, sometimes the mask doesn't come off, and like he had to work really hard. He had to go through recovery programs and healing programs, and many survivors do, because that's how lasting this impact is. And it's passed down through generations.
Yeah. So, going to our other discussion point, how do you feel that this, the residential schools and all these things that these people have gone through, how does that affect intergenerationally? How do you think that affects his grandchildren and himself and his children and his parents? What do you think that has done to his whole family and then their culture? What do you guys think about that?
He worked really hard at not like emotionally being there for his grandchildren and stuff like that. So he probably did a good thing there where I think a lot of people maybe couldn't emotionally give, maybe in other situations or other people in this situation. He seemed to be able to. But I think for him and for other people, they took away, firstly, his um, traditions. So like, him passing on tradition, passing on the same breakfast his mom cooked for him, or the same, this kind of thing, kind of like raising your family from the things that you loved about the way you were raised as well. So family traditions and cultural traditions. And then the last thing I was thinking was just kind of the memories that you get from growing up that you pass on, and the stories that you pass on from growing up.
Yeah, well, similar to what Amelia said, I think growing up in an environment like that, there's a whole generation that doesn't get to learn its own cultural like ways and practices and all sorts of things. So it's obviously harder then to pass it down. So there's a lot of like cultural information and things that are lost. And besides that, also there's obviously these schools were meant as like conversion sort of things. So there's also the demonization of their own culture. So luckily for Harold, it seems like that didn't happen. So I'm pretty sure that for many people, like that conversion actually worked, and like they think of their own culture as something like they've been brainwashed and manipulated into thinking that their own culture is something that it's not. I think in those ways it definitely affects not only them but intergenerationally. The culture is either like a lot of it is lost, or it can even be antagonized.
Well, the intention was to have the kids go to these schools and bring the knowledge that they learned from these schools home to their parents. because the parents were so resistant to this assimilation that they, it was very insidious. They tried to do it through the kids. And with that came the Indian Act and the 60s scoop, which if they didn't send their kids to these schools, they would stop their rations. They would cut off, being paid any money. They would threaten them with jail. I believe Agnes's grandfather or father, and Phyllis Websted's grandfather or great grandfather, he went to prison because he refused to send them. And I think the grandmother, let it happen because she didn't want them to end up with nobody, like end up in the system, which is the result of that. And that's where a lot of the intergenerational impact is, because a lot of these kids were removed from their families because of being sent to these schools or forcibly sent. And afterwards, what they brought with them was Christianity and a different religion other than their own culture. And when they had kids, they would teach this to their kids, and not being able to have that connection back at home, that really, made that even more impactful on generations below them.
And also something to remember is this went on for a very long time. Jessica, you mentioned that this started in the 60s and 70s, and then the last school was closed in 1996. So that was a long time that these schools were happening. So multiple generations were being sent there. So many children were being sent to so many schools.
They started around the 1800s as factory and agriculture schools, and eventually they turned it into church-led and federal government-led. A lot of military forts were turned into schools as well. So this was going on since the 1800s and possibly a little bit before that, but they didn't officially make it a law or an act until around the 1900s, late 1800s. And that was to forcibly, you have to send your child to this school, or they would be punished in different ways. The 60s and 70s. The 60s is when the 60s scoop happened. It's when they rounded up all the Indigenous children and either put them into other homes or sent them to these residential schools against the wishes of their parents.
I wanted to share my team. When studying this, we created a map of the United States to show how many schools there were. And so I was going to show that map because this was one thing that really hit home for me, was the amount of schools that there were. Because when you think about residential schools, and if you're not really thinking about it, then you're like, there were some schools, this happened. But then when you see the map of how many schools there actually were, it's thousands of children, and so this is the map. And so we see that the darkest colors is Oklahoma, and then Arizona and Alaska. These have the most schools that have been reported. And one thing to also remember is these are only the schools that have been reported. Right here, we see the lightest color, Texas, Florida, all these don't have any schools reported. That means their government isn't putting in the effort to reporting their schools. That doesn't mean that they didn't have any. So Arizona, Alaska, Oklahoma, those are all, they're putting in the work to report the schools and support this cause by reporting the schools and searching the schools. And so these lighter places aren't better, I would say, which is something that I was originally thinking and then, came to realization on my own.
Especially Texas.
Yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts when looking at this map?
Do you have, is there like statistics or something from like like other people reporting from those places, like finding the schools and like trying to get them reported or anything? Like, is that a thing?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot that have like they had drones go over or had ground penetrating radar systems scan the area, and they've seen what looks like remains, but they haven't searched the grounds. They haven't uncovered anything yet because they need permission from the government. They need permission from the church. I think they need permission from the city as well, and the families as well that attended the school. You know, it's actually a very complicated process. It's again it's like MIW, another maze of justice for this issue as well. So there are locations of schools that have been listed as found, or an estimated amount of remains that they think are on those grounds, but we can't prove that yet until they're allowed to search and actually prove that there's. I mean, I believe that there's remains there. I don't need, physical proof. If the radar is showing it and people are saying it, then yeah, it's a process to start to uncover and dig up, or even try to dig up, because remember, they are burial grounds in some way and form. They're still a burial ground.
Sarah, I think I really like how Jessica's background looks. So what if we all put an orange background just to kind of fill the screen a bit more?
I don't actually know how to do that. Does anyone have any final statements they want to say?
I guess I would like to just reiterate or paraphrase a quote from an Orange Shirt Day event that was at First Nations University of Canada. A speaker that was there, and I'm not sure if she was hosting or she was just a speaker, but she was leading most of the event, and she said, "We did not create this. We did not create this system. Like, no one, basically, because it started in the 1800s. No one here created the system. No one here created residential schools, but we all inherited it, and including their people inheriting the trauma. So what do you do with something that you inherit? Do you take care of it, or do you forget about it? Or do you sell it to, make, capitalize off of it? I choose to take care of it and to make sure that it's better for the people that come after us, because that's who's going to be here when we are gone. Just like with the elders, the youth and their children and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren, they will be there when they're gone. So we have to make sure that the reconciliation happens from now on, and we can't let things just be forgotten. We have to keep talking about it. Orange Shirt Day is not just a single day, it should be 365 days out of the year.
Any last reflections?
Unfortunately, I still have enough words in English to say about this horrible issue. Yeah, but I think that it's right thing to share this problem. I think it's right thing to share any problem and discuss it and try to make right choices, to figure out and show to make other people who afraid discuss this problem, to inspire them to share about it. Yeah.
I mean, in today's political climate in the US, where Indigenous peoples and communities are still systemically oppressed in so many ways, I think it's really important to recognize and to raise awareness about the reality of Indian residential schools, because it's something that I didn't know about, and I think it's something that a lot of people, even from America, maybe not ignore, but are just like oblivious to. So I think it's really important to raise that awareness, and only through that, I think, can the acceptance of Native American and Indigenous cultures progress.
I have been noticing, I think it's really good to talk about these stories and this culture. And I think that there is a long way to go, but I also see a lot of change happening from campaigns like this and governments, different cities, allowing the schools to be shown, like you're saying, Arizona versus Texas, like that kind of thing. And I also see people in culture and people in society understanding that topics and the real history of America is important to talk about. And you see that in so many movies that they're talking about the real history and kind of, like even we were talking about how like second Frozen movie was about taking land from Indigenous people. And there was like all these movies that they actually talk about it, even when the protagonists of the movie are these white cultures, the history of these white cultures that they discover in the movies are about they took the land from Indigenous people. And that's like a very huge improvement, where it's opening up the conversation in a way in children's movies in ways that has never been done before. And so I think that more and more people are understanding what's going on, and they're willing to listen to campaigns and to stories like this now, even changing from when we were in high school even. So I have a lot of hope for the future of this cause and this campaign, because of the things that I'm seeing in culture in today's world.
I hope that the schools get searched. I hope that we find a way to send the children's remains back to their tribes so they can get proper burial. And I hope that the people responsible for this, the authority figures that were never there for these children and inflicted trauma on them, get what they deserve. Obviously more than 2 years for sure. It's so sad to me that something as blatantly horrible and traumatic as this is not getting the attention that it deserves. My heart is there for everyone that is going through this trauma, and I want to do what I can to support this cause. And what people can do is write a letter to their congressmen asking them to search schools, asking them to report schools, bringing this issue into light for the people in their local government. You can share posts, you can buy merchandise from Indigenous groups, you can spread the word on social media, attend the marches, just try to really get involved and bring to light what's been going on. Just don't let it be quiet. Don't let it be silenced. Jessica, I would love for you to tell us the other events that are happening over the next 2 weeks. Would you be able to share that with the group?
Today there is Wa'ai Dana'a, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right or wrong. I did my best. It's called Now is the Time. It is at 4:30 p.m. It is a virtual event. You can join the Paul Martin Law Library's Sharing Circle, and they will present the National Film Board films, This Was the Time, and Wa'ai Dana'a, Now is the Time. So these are films that have to do with residential schools. And there's many events happening. There is an Indigenous Peoples Day event, which is happening on October 10th and 11th in multiple cities all across the United States. It is sponsored by the Indigenous Peoples Movement and many other organizations. There will be speakers, artists, musicians, dancers, dance contests, bird regalia contests. There will be vendors, and there will be an MIW ceremony as well, ceremonial dance as well. So as long as you just keep looking for events like this that are led by Indigenous people and uplift them and attend them and support them, their voices will go a long way. Orange Shirt Day, Every Child Matters, which is today. It's from noon to 2:30. You can join them for the blessing of the land and welcoming, the Orange Shirt Day flag being raised, followed by a moment of silence to honor and remember those who did not survive residential schools. The event will include Indigenous performances and guest speakers who will share their personal experience with residential schools and reconciliation. Event organizers Eddie Charlie and Kristen Spray will speak to the importance of raising awareness about residential schools to honor the more than 6,000 children who died and the sacrifices that were made by 150,000 residential school survivors and their families across Canada. The event is free and it will be live streamed on the city's Facebook page. And I really hope that the remains of the children are found, and I hope that there can be healing through all of the discoveries as they come, because we have a long road ahead of us. There's many schools and there's lots of people that have been affected by this. So let's just keep that in mind, that this is trauma that is being unearthed as each school gets searched.
Thank you. I also want to give a shout out to the Every Child Matters Facebook page. I recently joined them, and it is a really beautiful group and a really wonderful community. They have a consistent flow of information and they share beautiful images of different merchandise you can buy that different Indigenous groups have been creating. They also share stories on there, and it's just a lovely, there's lovely interactions when people are commenting on the different photos. And so ever since I've joined that, I've just really appreciated the hard work that they're doing to support this cause. So if you guys have Facebook, I know some people don't anymore, but I recommend that group. It's really well done and really beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate all you guys taking your time today for this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.